Who are we picking up this week? Well, we have actual, real, regular season baseball games to make our decisions based on this week. We're excited to talk all about that with Ryan Boyer on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the first regular season Saturday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast, sponsored by Fantrax. I'm Erik Halterman, joined by my Saturday co-host, Ryan Boyer, and the first of what's supposed to be a season worth of FAAB shows, although, of course, FAAB this first real weekend is a little tricky. This is the first FAAB of the year for some people. It's at least the second for many others, so there's going to be real variety in who's available in all your leagues. But we're going to try to cover, every single player? No, we're not going to quite do that. But we're going to try to cover as many as we can. But Ryan, how's your season going so far? Are you winning all your leagues, or do you think you might actually still have to make some FAAB pickups these next 6 months?
Yeah, probably going to be spending a lot of FAAB dollars on closers, which I usually wind up doing, especially early in the season. That's really the hot pickups. Just kind of see how bullpens are shaking out, and it's not always going to work out, as bullpens often don't, but you got to spend that money somewhere.
Yeah, luckily we have a whole bunch of reliever specs, closer specs, maybe some real closers even in the list today. We'll be getting to those in a minute. But first, we want to talk about the biggest headlines of the last 24 hours or so, many of which will have FAAB implications. I'm sure we'll get into those. The top headline is, unfortunately, an injury. Royce Lewis dealing with what's being called a severe quad strain. Unfortunately, any muscle strain for Royce Lewis was likely to be pretty bad. This one is not one of the good ones. Sidelined for over a month. This was the Royce Lewis experience. If you drafted him, you should have been somewhat prepared for this and should have some other third baseman on your roster. Is there any fantasy fallout for this in terms of other players you'd be looking to pick up with Royce Lewis? Now we know he's not going to be there. We speculated he wasn't going to be there, but now we know for sure, and it's going to be quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the most relevant potential pickup is Willie Castro. I don't know if he's going to slide in on an everyday basis at third base. They called up Austin Martin. Kyle Farmer is also an option at third. But Castro, stole 33 bases last year. He's not super interesting beyond that, but multi-position eligibility, can steal some bases. So I think he could be relevant. But yeah, the Royce Lewis news is really just a bummer. I tweeted out when it happened. It's kind of the Royce Lewis experience condensed down to 3 innings. He had a home run, a single, and a long-term injury in the first 3 innings of the season. So unfortunately, that's just you knew what you were getting into if you used a early round pick on him, and hopefully, as you mentioned, you have a suitable backup plan.
Yeah, you probably expected to get about 5 months worth of good baseball from Royce Lewis, and you still could, but now you're going to need him to stay healthy the entire season when he eventually does return. I like the Willie Castro shout as well. He stole, 33 bases in 409 plate appearances. If you prorate that to a full season, he gets around 50 steals. Now, I don't think he's going to get 50 steals this season, but when you're plugging him into your lineups for this week, you could think of him as a 50 steal kind of guy, at least while he's in there.
True.
We got a question in here in the chat about Willie Castro or Michael Busch or Yoan Moncada as a Royce Lewis replacement. This is in a categories league, so I assume a roto league, maybe a head-to-head categories league. Which direction would you go there?
It might depend a little on your needs, but in a vacuum, I think I would take a shot on Michael Busch's upside. What do you think?
My first thought was Castro, just because I think there's some chance that he does something actually exciting, and the other two are more just kind of there. But I think that is being unfair to Busch. I think there's some chance that Busch does something actually exciting. I think Moncada is the guy you bid $1 or $0 on when all the other options fall through, and you're happy to have some plate appearances, but that's it. Moving on to the next injury, we've got Sean Murphy. he is going to miss some time. Just double checking exactly how many weeks they have said that it is so far. Haven't said a number, but a strain left oblique is not something that usually leads to just a minimum length stay, I don't think. Travis d'Arnaud, though, slides in pretty cleanly as the backup and suddenly becomes actually a pretty interesting fantasy option, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as unusually deep as catcher is, I don't know that he's relevant in single catcher leagues, but certainly in 2 catcher leagues, he's a viable pickup. Production has been, he didn't hit super well last year, but it hasn't been that long since he has been a above average hitting catcher, and he's obviously in a tremendous lineup. So I think definitely at least 2 catcher leagues, he could be viable.
Yeah, one of the places I have Sean Murphy, and if you remember from our previous podcast, Sean Murphy was my most drafted catcher, so I'm going to have to be answering this question.
I immediately thought of you when I saw the injury.
Yeah, well, I thought of you when you got homers from your 31-year-old Padres, so off to a better start for Team Boyer than Team Halterman so far. But in one of my leagues where I have Murphy, d'Arnaud is available, even though he's owned in most 15-team mixed leagues. So I think I might have to make sure I'm the one to get him. Really regretting taking Gary Sanchez over him, I think, as my second catcher, because then I would have already had d'Arnaud, but I would still be having to pick up somebody else. So I'm not sure it really makes that big of a deal, but something I would be thinking about next year and something I wish I did differently. Let's talk about a few guys who didn't get injured, but whose stock certainly took a hit. AJ Puck, tons of buzz this spring as somebody converting back into a rotation role after being a reliever for the first 142 outings of his major league career. Of course, a highly rated prospect as a starter, but we weren't sure what he was going to do. Now he's back in that role. So far, what he's going to do is put up an 18 ERA, a 450 whip, and a 43% walk rate. Probably not going to stay this bad, but man, should we be actually worried about AJ Puck, or just that was the first bad outing?
Yeah, I didn't wind up with Puck in any leagues. I was willing to speculate if it was the right fit because he did look so good in spring training. But, given the injury history, given that he was going to be under innings limitations, he wasn't really a target of mine anyway. If you did wind up with him, I would lean towards putting him on the bench right now. I mean, I would certainly try to hang on to him if you could. I also probably wouldn't be losing any sleep about cutting him. I'm skeptical that he's going to be able to hold up as a starter. And, even in a best case scenario, if he does pitch well, he's going to be under pretty heavy innings restrictions. For example, a guy like Garrett Crochet that we're going to talk about later, I would not hesitate at all to drop Puck for Garrett Crochet. Ideally, stick Puck on your bench. Hopefully he looks a lot better the next time out. But I don't think, especially in shallower leagues, you should be losing any sleep over having to cut him.
Yeah, just taking a look at the Marlins projected starters grid, which goes 4 weeks into the future this year. We've expanded that from 2 to 4. Obviously, weeks 3 and 4 are a little bit dicey, but Puck next week is supposed to be home against the Angels. Theoretically, that's a start you want in Miami against a weak lineup. He did just get lit up by the Pirates. I think the way to think about whether or not you're going to keep Puck is if you're going to use him next week, good, keep him. But if you're not going to use him next week, after that, he's going at the Yankees. I don't think you're going to use that one, at least as of right now. In mid-April, he gets a possible 2-starter against the Giants and Cubs, but that's a little bit far down the line. Do you think you'd use him against the Angels in, let's say, a 15-team mixed league?
I would have to be in a pretty tough spot, and I would hope that at this early stage of the season, I would not be in that tough of a spot. I would be nervous about him kind of being a ratio wrecker.
Yeah, fair enough. I think I wouldn't be surprised if I end up using him at least one place, but if I can find other starters who are more interesting, I think I'd be happy. Another player who's seen his stock take a hit is Esteury Ruiz. There was some thought that he might not actually be a starting outfielder in Oakland, that he might only be on the short side of a platoon. And through the first 3 games, that's the case. He started against a lefty and sat against 2 righties. So, man, if you drafted Esteury Ruiz thinking, hey, look at how many steals he got in less than a full season worth of playing time last year, 67 in just shy of 500 plate appearances. Well, what happens if he gets 600 plate appearances? It's Oakland. Of course he's going to get 600 plate appearances. Well, there's a decent chance that we actually see his playing time cut by 1 or 200 rather than added to. This is a problem, I think, for people who drafted Esteury Ruiz, because they probably did so fairly early.
Yeah, that's the danger in putting all your stolen base eggs in one basket, especially. Guy like Ruiz, I mean, it's, Oakland's roster obviously is terrible. I could certainly see him wiggling his way into the lineup, whether it's by injury or, JJ Bleday is just not all that good. Esteury Ruiz could take his spot. Lawrence Butler move back to center field. That could easily happen. And he's, even if he plays 3-4 times a week, maybe that is a little optimistic right now based on his first 3 games usage. He could still put up a decent stolen base total. But is he worth that roster spot for, he is basically the definition of a 1 category player. Can you afford to have that spot on a guy who's a part-time player, even if he does, provide a lot of bang for the buck when he is in the lineup? I just don't know if it's worth it.
Yeah, which might make him a cut in shallower leagues, right? If you're in a 10 or 12 team Roto league, would you try to hold him through this weekend, given what you probably invested in him, and just see? But I don't really see anything in the Oakland A's lineup so far that suggests, no, actually, we are going to see Esteury Ruiz against half of the righties. We just haven't seen him yet.
Yeah, I would hope to be able to at least put him on the bench for now. Maybe if you're in a daily league, that would be ideal. You could stick him in there when he's playing. But I wouldn't be too precious with that roster spot. Hopefully, as plentiful as stolen bases are around the league now, you could find someone else to kind of make up that difference there.
Yeah, maybe a Victor Scott, who we might get to later, although he may have been already grabbed in your league. Maybe a Johan Rojas, who is starting games in center field for the Phillies despite a horrible spring. There are plenty of options for speed and defense outfielders. And, of course, Ruiz, part of the problem with him is he's not a speed and defense outfielder. He's a speed-only outfielder, which is why, for all his fantasy value, he's not even a regular for the Oakland A's. One more bit of news to get to. Kevin Gausman, we've been tracking his status throughout the spring because he's been on the fence of whether or not his shoulder issues were going to lead to a trip to the injured list. Turns out, no, they won't lead to a trip to the injured list. And they won't even lead to him missing a single turn in the rotation, but he's going to start Sunday against the Rays. So love to see that if you drafted Gausman early. I liked him. I had him as my 2nd or 3rd starting pitcher, I guess 3rd behind Garrett Cole when Cole was healthy before this injury news popped up. So I've got him on a number of teams and was really pretty worried. So I'm really happy to see the direction this is turning here.
Did you wind up playing him in leagues where the week runs through Sunday? Because I know that was a tough decision for a lot of people when it looked like it was very much up in the air whether he was going to go Sunday or Monday.
Yeah, I managed to get him in, I think, in most of them. I'll throw a plug to the RotoWire My Leagues feature. If you play in a lot of leagues, it's great just to keep track of, where did I have this guy again? If there's somebody whose injury situation you're tracking and you get news late before the lineup lock. And I think that's what happened here. There wasn't exactly news, but it seemed to be shifting a little bit more towards, no, he might actually go on Sunday. So I was able to get him in. Hopefully I don't end up regretting that. Obviously, a pitcher in his first start of the year, coming off of shoulder woes, going against the Rays, he could well get blown up here. But given it was the first half week and I had a lot of guys who weren't even playing, I think he was usable. Would you expect, if you were drafting today, would you just have Kevin Gausman all the way back up to where he started? Or should we still think of him as, a 33-year-old who is now with some dicey health situation?
I'm not really concerned about he bounced back really quickly, and it wasn't ever a structural issue. It was fatigue, they called it. I'm not super concerned. It kind of reminds me a little bit of remember 2 years ago, I believe, Zach Wheeler had a shoulder thing late in spring training, and I can't remember if he wound up going on the IL or just had a kind of delayed season debut, and that pushed his ADP down a good amount, but then he wound up being, just fine. And I suspect that's going to be the case with Kevin Gossman. I think you're going to start him no matter what Sunday, certainly, if you still have that decision to make. Keep in mind, it is going to be probably an abbreviated start. He went 52 pitches, I believe, in his last live BP or whatever he threw last. So, maybe he can squeeze out 5 innings. It'd be a little bit of a push, but, if Kevin Gossman has a chance to go 5 innings, you're probably going to start him regardless.
Yeah, the Wheeler example is a good one to bring up, and it makes me regret starting Kevin Gossman because 2 seasons ago, as you mentioned, Zach Wheeler was dealing with some issues to start the year. He made his first start on April 12th, although I think that was the year that this whole season started, maybe on April 7th, so I think he may have avoided the IL. But across Wheeler's first 3 outings that year, he gave up 12 earned runs in 12 2/3 innings. Everybody was quite worried, but then the rest of the way, 23 starts, 2.31 ERA. So still some possibility that Gossman looks like a guy who's been recently dealing with an injury, especially against a lineup like the Rays. But with that Wheeler example, we know there's every chance he gets into a groove for most of the season and is just fine. We are going to get into a groove talking about some FAAB pickups. We're going to hit on the biggest names you might want to pick up this week. But first, I want to talk to you about our sponsor, Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Coming from another service, Fantrax makes it easy. Fantrax can import any of your current leagues and customize if needed. Fantrax offers the most in-depth player pool in the industry, including minor league players. Do you need a customizable commissioner service for your fantasy league? Fantrax offers more customization than any other platform. Waivers, categories, scoring system, schedule. Fantrax offers custom solutions for all that and more. And it's all free. Sign up for free today and be entered to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/RotoWire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. Back here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast, talking about FAAB pickups for the first time this year with Ryan Boyer. And we're going to start with the big names, the names that are creating some buzz this week. This is what we're going to go with every week. There's going to be some call-ups, I think, as we get into April and May. Right now, we're just trying to find the names that we think are the buzziest at the moment. Let's start with one infielder on here, Jordan Westburg. Now, I should note, a lot of these guys are going to be picked up in your 15-team mixed leagues, although we'll certainly have some names for you. But we also wanted to make sure we've got names for those playing in 10 and 12-team leagues as well. And Jordan Westburg, certainly one of those. He went from not very owned to on a roster in about half of Yahoo leagues, just as one example. Westburg was maybe competing for playing time in a crowded Orioles infield, but now that Jackson Holliday's not there, Westburg should be free to be nearly an everyday player. But I guess the question here is, Ryan, is he an exciting one in shallower leagues? Because you're not going to be able to pick him up in deeper ones because he's already on somebody's roster.
I think he's fairly exciting. I'm kicking myself a little bit about not rostering him in any leagues because, as you mentioned, it seemed like he was competing for a job, but doesn't definitely seem like he has a job now. Started at DH on opening day, started at second base in their second game. Could bounce around a little bit, pick up additional position eligibility would be nice, but the left field wall in Baltimore is going to hurt, but he's got power. He's got a little bit of speed, and I think he's certainly capable of providing mixed league value.
So in a 12, are we going like 10%, something like that, or more just 5 or 6 or less?
Probably more the latter, I would say.
Yeah, I think I'm there with you. I think I'd go maybe 5 or 6%. Because if I miss out on him and just have to get a guy, I think he's not far above that line. Another guy who will be picked up in your deep leagues, but not necessarily in 12-team mixed leagues, Ceddanne Rafaela, an exciting speedster rookie who didn't necessarily show great plate discipline last year in his small sample in the big leagues. Questions about his hit tool, but certainly in a roto league where you need speed, he's a high potential guy. Comes in eligible at outfield and should maybe pick up infield eligibility too, depending on how the Red Sox use him. He may already have it if you use lower position threshold, so he could be useful in a number of ways. But just how useful is he? Is this guy over or under what you would bid on Jordan Westburg if you're looking for a middle infielder?
He's over. It would probably be more like the 10% that you first mentioned. Yeah, the play discipline last year, not great, but was much better in the minors. Certainly the speed is going to play. He's not a big guy, so I don't know how much the power is ultimately going to carry over. He did hit for a good amount of power in the minors, and bats right-handed at Fenway, so that's going to help. Hitting a little lower in the order, but that's not a huge deal right now, I don't think. I think about 10% probably is about right for him.
Yep, I think I'm right there with you. Let's go to some other outfielders. Let's go to the most exciting guy this spring, I think. Well, outside of Wyatt Langford, but if you can FAAB Wyatt Langford, can I please join that league? Victor Scott, the buzziest outfielder of the spring, had quite a journey where first he was just a hyped up long shot, and then it looked like he might actually be on the team, and then he was sent down, and then there was one more injury, this time to Dylan Carlson, and he is indeed there. Now, of course, Victor Scott will have been picked up after that news if you're in a deep league that's had FAAB run already, but there's certainly plenty of leagues where he's still available tonight, even in the deeper ones. So would you be blowing the budget on Victor Scott? I mean, this might be easily a 10-15% potential guy.
Blowing the budget, no. I do worry that it could still be a short-term stay for him. You know, they're going to get – it sounds like they could get Nootbaar back as soon as next week. Tommy Edmonds probably at least a couple weeks behind that. You know, Victor Scott will have the opportunity to show that he deserves that playing time, but, you know, if they – when they get Edmund back, I'm just not sure what exactly they're going to do because it suddenly becomes pretty crowded. The stolen base potential, though, is just so high that I think he's worth at least maybe 15%, 20% of your FAAB just for that upside alone. What do you think?
Right. Yeah, because if it works out, you get last year's Asturi Ruiz season, which is the season people were paying for with Asturi Ruiz this year. They were paying for even more than it. And if you want to get that guy who I'm not sure about the bat, but could be literally the league leader in steals or right up there, if Scott sticks around, that's the kind of upside we're talking about. But I do think that means there's some teams where he probably doesn't make much sense at all if you're doing pretty well in speed, if you are in search of something else.
Yeah.
You know, there's only so many guys a year where you can bid 50. Well, there's only so many guys a year where you can win a 15% bid, I should say. So don't necessarily throw them out like candy. I don't know. Something to think about there. Team specific. A guy who's maybe less team specific, Will Benson of the Reds. He's a beneficiary of all the Reds injuries, I guess in particular TJ Friedl not being there in the outfield. We actually did see Will Benson today in the lineup against a lefty. Which means that he might be playing every day. He'll be gone in your 15-team leagues, but in a smaller mixed league, pretty exciting everyday player, good all-around potential here for Will Benson. How high would you be going on him?
Yeah, he would be at the top of the list of the guys we've mentioned so far. He's a really big guy, but like his speed is probably his best asset, but he's also got plenty of power as well, and he's going to be calling Great American Ballpark home, obviously. Did not see where he was batting in the lineup today, but he was batting second against a righty on opening day. So that was
ninth against a lefty.
Okay. So. Yeah, I kind of figured it would be towards the bottom, but just the fact that he's in the lineup at all against the lefty is encouraging. Yeah, it seemed like they were going to bat Ellie De La Cruz second, but he was done batting sixth on opening day. Benson up in the second spot. So that's a great spot for him to be in. Great situation in Cincinnati. I think he's worthy of a pretty healthy FAAB bid if he's still available.
So we're talking 15 to 20% in that range?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. And whether or not you want him or Scott, I think it's going to depend on team. Again, if you really need speed, Scott could be your answer, all in one guy. But if you just need more talent, Will Benson could be quite a lot of talent. And you get him for the whole year, which is another reason why you can throw some real FAAB bids around this time of the year. You got 6 months of the guy, not just 2 or 3. Let's move from the big hitters that we're talking about to the biggest pitchers. The one starting pitcher who we think deserves quite a big bid is Garrett Crochet. Again, may have gone last weekend once it was announced that he was the opening day starter for the White Sox. But in leagues where you didn't have an early run, he's definitely still out there, I would think. He wasn't getting a lot of buzz in early draft season. And in 12-team leagues, I think we got to be considering Garrett Crochet as well. He's the ace for the White Sox. So how far are we going on the ace for the White Sox?
Yeah, 15% sounds about right, I think. The upside is pretty high, but I mean, he's pitched 25 innings last year and 0 innings the year before that. His opening day start was literally his first ever in pro ball. But he held velocity. He was hitting, I think, near 100 and sitting at like 97.5 miles per hour. Got a really good slider. I mean, he's got things working against him, certainly. The White Sox team, the workload issues, the not a great park to pitch in, but there's definitely upside there, and I think he's at least 15% of your FAAB budget probably.
Yeah, I could see it. I love it as a talent. I'm a little bit nervous about how many starts can I even say with a straight face, I think he's going to get more than 20 starts? And 20 is a really low number. But like you said, he's worked exclusively as a reliever. 20 is almost as many total innings as he threw last year, right? And I think after his next start, I think if he goes 6 or 7 innings, he will have equaled his innings total from last season when you include spring training. So the innings floor is just so low that it's hard to get excited about throwing that much out there. So I might end up a little lower, more like the 10 to 11%. But
should note quickly on Crochet. I believe he gets the Braves next, so that'll be a very stiff test. We'll probably know a little more about what to expect from him after his next outing.
Yeah, and so if you're in one of those leagues where you have to use the guys you're picking up right away or something, it's going to be a little bit dicey there. We'll have more starting pitchers to cover in the budget buys section, but as far as the expensive names goes, it's all relievers from here because, of course, this time of year, we find out who's actually closing, which looks like Abner Uribe is the guy in Milwaukee. They've had 2 saves in their first 2 games, and pretty uncomplicatedly, it was Abner Uribe in the 9th both times. I think it was Trevor McGill in the 7th both times. Joel Payamps got the 8th one time, and I forget who got it today, but it was not him. But Uribe couldn't be used more like a closer through these first 2 games. So are you just going to bid on him as if you're getting 3 months worth of the Brewers closer until Devin Williams comes back?
I think you have to. It was Pat Murphy was cagey about what he might do going into the season, but actions speak louder than words, and there's no reason to believe it's anyone other than Uribe currently. And Devin Williams is going to miss, as you mentioned, at least 3 months, and that's the kind of injury that you could certainly see a setback. It might wind up being just a lost year for him. Hopefully it's not. And he certainly should get that job back when he is healthy, if he is healthy. But Uribe, while the control is not good, he's certainly looks like a closer in waiting, and he could be a potential lockdown guy. So if you're thinking about 3 months worth of saves for a potentially elite-ish arm, I think that's worth a pretty healthy FAAB bid.
Talking 15, 20% or something?
Yeah.
Even in a 12, I guess is the question too, because he will have been grabbed in some 15s.
Yeah, I think so, at least. I generally spend most of my FAAB dollars on closers early in the season because, as you mentioned, this is the time of the year when you can get the most value for the full season for them. If you buy them now, you can get them for potentially 6 months, so potentially have a closer for 6 months. Maybe it's just 3 months for Uribe, but I think now is the time of the year to spend those FAAB dollars. So I would be aggressive.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, especially if you left the draft with, 1.5 closers in a league where you really wanted 2. You knew leaving the draft that you were going to spend a good portion of your FAAB budget on closers. So the fact that you're now doing it, you shouldn't worry about that. That was the plan all along. Speaking of closers, Jason Foley, maybe a closer, sure pitched like one on the opening day save for the Tigers, although worth noting that he did come in with 1 out in the 9th. The Tigers actually stuck with Andrew Chafin, the lefty, who got the 8th inning and then retired a lefty to start the 9th, which is maybe the way you deploy your bullpen if you're going to use a committee. But then again, Foley was throwing over 100 miles per hour sinkers. He sure looked like a closer. How are you reading this one?
Yeah, and AJ Hinch said earlier today that he had Foley kind of pegged for a certain part of the lineup, and it just worked out that way. But then we also saw Alex Lang today. He threw, I think, 24 pitches and only threw a third of them for strikes and got 1 out, I believe.
Sounds about right.
Yeah, and I didn't see how that game wound up at the end, if it's concluded by now, but haven't seen if Foley pitched in that one or not yet. But he certainly looks like the guy at the top of the pecking order. He's not a guy who gets a ton of swings and misses, surprisingly for a guy who throws that hard, but keeps the ball on the ground. And I think there's a decent chance he is their best reliever, and is certainly the early indications are he's at the top of the pecking order.
Yeah, just checking on the box score for today. This has gone final, I believe, since we started recording. Foley did not pitch in that one. Shelby Miller pitched the final 2 innings of a 10-inning game and ends up with the win. He entered the 9th of a tie game and stuck in there. So he's another name who could be in the mix, but I don't think we're necessarily throwing much at him. So Jason Foley with his, the potential for saves for 6 full months, but also with the situation in Detroit, as you described, versus Abner Uribe, who probably only has the job for 3 months, but seems to have a firmer handle on it. Who are you throwing more money on this weekend?
Uribe, and I just think he's the better pitcher too. So if I'm going 15+% on Uribe, it's probably more like 10 on Foley, I would say.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Foley, too, we can't forget that in the previous seasons, not a big strikeout guy, under 20% all 3 years. So hasn't looked like a closer before, could still do that, but might just be the top of a committee. 2 more closers. Kevin Ginkel, a temporary closer in Arizona with Paul Sewald on the shelf. How many months worth of saves are we bidding on with Kevin Ginkel, I guess, and that will determine how much we're bidding on him.
1, I mean, it's grade 2 strain, I believe, of the oblique for Sewald. So looking probably at minimum 3 to 4 weeks, I would say, maybe more. Good thing with Ginkel is he's basically, they came out and said that he's going to be the one who gets the saves. So you don't have to worry about that. And we know that he's quite good. Certainly showed that in the playoffs last year, had a really good regular season as well. I would prioritize him ahead of Foley, I think, just because we know that he's going to get the saves for a month, and the Detroit situation's a little dicier. So, if we're going pecking order of the 3 so far, I would go Uribe, Ginkel, and then Foley.
So that's putting Ginkel at like a 11, 12, 13%.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Yeah, that it feels expensive when we're talking about a guy who could become a setup man that you want to drop in, May 3rd or something like that. But there's at least a possibility, right, that the Diamondbacks stick with something like a committee and Ginkel continues to get some saves after Sewald comes back. So I hear you there. One final closer in the big expensive buys section, Griffin Jax. He was getting drafted in late, or I guess picked up in 15-team leagues, but he should still be available in ones that are doing their first FAAB this weekend. And he should get some number of saves. It looks like he's definitely the guy in Minnesota with Yohan Duran out. How would you pick up Jax? What kind of money would you throw on him compared to Kevin Ginkel? Similar situations.
I think it's about in the same range. Probably rank him a little ahead of Foley, around the Ginkel range. Duran, how much time is he going to miss with the was it oblique injury?
Yeah, it's also an oblique.
Yeah.
So theoretically, they're going to miss the exact same amount of time.
Yeah, theoretically. Yeah, and there's a 0% chance that Jax is going to keep the job once Duran comes back.
Right.
So I think though it probably falls in about the same range, probably the 10 to 12% ish.
Yeah. I think it's tougher to do there. So maybe I would make sure that I'd a little bit lower on him than the other guys, so that if I manage to be the top bid on all of them, he's the one I don't get. But if you're searching for saves, you got to pay the price for saves. We're going to move on to our budget buys in a minute, but first I want to talk to you about Rival Fantasy. It's a new baseball season, and that means it's time for MLB DFS on Rival Fantasy. If you want to make every day draft day, try out Rival Fantasy's daily and weekly MLB Best Ball. Draft a squad for single day slate or an entire week of games. Play the matchups and home road splits without worrying about waiver pickups or daily roster management. Drafting isn't your thing? Rival Fantasy has Fantasy Bingo, a salary cap-free DFS game. Fill out your squad and try to complete achievements on your bingo card. Get 5 in a row or 4 in a corner to win. Then there's challenges. Pick which player will score more fantasy points in head-to-head matchups. DFS has never been easier. Go to joinrival.com/RotoWire or use code RotoWire at signup to get a $200 deposit match plus $25 in free entries. If you're ready to play fantasy sports made for sports fans, it's time to play on Rival Fantasy. Back with Ryan Boyer here. I combined your name with Rival Fantasy. I'll give you a new name each week, depending on our sponsor, apparently. But we've been talking about our FAAB pickups. Who are we going to be picking up this weekend? We've discussed many of the big names. Several of the big names, of course, will have been claimed in the deeper leagues. We're going to move on to some guys who we're not throwing a lot of money at, but we definitely are going to be interested in at least one league. We're going to go back and forth here. Starting with me and Travis d'Arnaud, who we touched on earlier. He is anywhere where Sean Murphy just went down and Travis d'Arnaud is available. You got to go get him. And this is a tricky one, thinking about how much to bid, because if you're in a league where you're the only one who needs a catcher because you just lost Sean Murphy, I mean, you might not face any other bids. Travis d'Arnaud isn't that exciting. But if you do face other bids, he's probably going to be a lot better than the other options out there. I mean, the other options out there are going to be backups. So it's a tough one. I don't want to go too high, but I'm saying that I'm specifically thinking about Sean Murphy teams and thinking that I got to go at least 6%. Is that crazy? You're going higher or lower? If you, again, assuming you're a Sean Murphy team and need him.
I would tend to go higher just because I think you need to make sure you get him. If you wind up overspending a little bit but still get them, I think that's okay.
All right. So you'll be outbidding me for Travis d'Arnaud. Who's your first hitter on the list here?
Yeah, Brendan Donovan. He's batted leadoff first 2 games. Hasn't done much, as the Cardinals have not done much, but he was part of my group last year, my most rostered players. So obviously I'm keen on rostering him. Not a ton of upside, but I think he's going to be pretty well rounded. Going to hit lead off at the top of it should be a pretty good lineup. Showed a little bit more power last year. He's going to hit for a good average. Gets on base at a high clip. If he continues to hit lead off, he's going to score a bunch of runs. So as far as also multi-position eligible as well. As far as percentage roster bid, if I set it at 8, you got the over or the under?
I think I'd take the under because, I think you're thinking in probably a 12 because he's gone in the 15s. Yeah. And the issue with Donovan is in the 12, he's the type of player who's more exciting in a 15 because his strength is that he's always going to be there and he's going to be fine. And, he's going to compile because he's in that leadoff spot. In a smaller league, I worry that he doesn't do exciting things. And so I want him because he's leading off and because I think he's pretty good, but I don't feel like I have to have him. So I think I'd go under, and that's really because of the leagues where I'm likely to want him, not necessarily about his talent. Interesting comparison, though, between him and Jackson Merrill, who also is going to be gone, I think, in the deeper leagues. Although if you're in one of those deeper leagues that drafted early and this is your first FAAB, he's still out there. Jackson Merrill should give you infield and outfield eligibility. If he doesn't already have outfield eligibility to add to his shortstop, he'll be there in just a couple games. And he's a very exciting contact first young player. I like to see him rise quickly through the minors, skip through AAA. I'm not sure he's going to do a lot other than make contact, though. So it's kind of the same problem with Brendan Donovan, where he's going to be owned in the deeper leagues, and does he really pop in the shallow leagues in the way you need him to? So I think with that in mind, only more like a 2% in these 12 team leagues. You going over that or right under?
If I have to go over or under, I'd probably go just a hair over, I would say. I think the upside is enough to justify that, though he is, batting towards the bottom of the Padres lineup. As you mentioned, he, a good contact hitter, but the power numbers, the speed numbers, not super exciting from the minors, but super young guy that could still come. So if you want to pay for a little more upside, I'm fine with, throwing 3 or 4%, but I wouldn't go crazy. Willie Castro, who we mentioned a little bit earlier, looks like he's going to have at least fairly regular playing time now with Royce Lewis going down. As mentioned before, has third base and outfield eligibility, could potentially pick up additional eligibility as well. He's not a super exciting, well-rounded player, but he showed last year he could certainly help out in speed, and that was as a semi-regular. Stole 33 bases, was only caught 5 times. He's also had this kind of back-and-forth rivalry talk with Byron Buxton about who's going to steal more bases. How much is that anecdote worth? They're going to be going back and forth there. He's a switch hitter who's better against right-handed pitching, so that's going to presumably mean he's going to get those starts against righties. I think for those stolen bases, I would set it at 8%. You going over under?
Yeah, that's right around what I was thinking. I'll go a hair under. We'll say 6 to 8. Again, he's going to be rostered in the deeper leagues. In the shallower leagues, though, he's somebody who actually does a thing that's particularly interesting. I think that's what separates him from Brendan Donovan. There are teams where you could say, oh, no, I actually need Willie Castro, not just, yeah, he's playing and he'll not hurt me. And so I think there's going to be a lot of people who shouldn't bid on Willie Castro really at all. If you're fine in speed, he doesn't do a whole lot. And if you're in like a points league or something, he might not do a whole lot. But if you need him, you need him. Couple comments about Ben Brown in the chat. I will tell the commenters that we're going to get to him soon. We're still on hitters now, but we definitely are interested in Ben Brown. The next hitter that we're interested in right now, well, we've moved from the guys who are only available in the shallower leagues to some guys who are more broadly available. And guess what? They're less interesting. John Birdie, he's a backup. He theoretically could give you some good speed. But is he going to play often enough in New York? I mean, maybe if everybody else gets hurt, but I don't really think I need to get him now. So I'm going to go with just 1% on him. I think he's a end of your waterfall guy. I think he won't hurt you, but I don't think he's a priority at all.
Yeah, I'm fine with the 1%. I'll say a push for that.
Right.
He's could be a guy because he's switching leagues. If you're bidding in an AL only league, switch over. Because that multi-position eligibility could be fairly useful. But, Oswaldo Cabrera, by the way, has I think 17 hits in the first 2 games. So he's trying to keep Birdie on the bench.
Let's jump him up the list. Let's go to Oswaldo Cabrera right now and take my name off the list and put yours instead. Why don't we keep going and you give me how much you're going to bid on Oswaldo Cabrera?
Yeah, I don't know that I would bid anymore, honestly. Because Birdie at least has that speed that's the most interesting tool out of either of those guys has. But, as I mentioned, Oswaldo Cabrera off to a good start in the first couple of games, looking like he could get fairly regular playing time at third base. We saw that DJ LeMahieu, news broke, he has a non-displaced fracture as well, but they said that the recovery doesn't seem to be affected. So it doesn't look like that's going to keep him out necessarily any longer than the bone bruise would. So Oswaldo Cabrera, John Birdie looking at maybe 2-ish weeks worth of starts. And after that, going to kind of bounce around. I think he's probably also a 1% guy for me. You could take it over or under.
I'll say maybe 2, just because he's young and kind of like he's the guy you put near the end, but you hope that he's the guy you get at the end of your waterfall. So maybe that's not 2%. Maybe that's just 2 out of 1,000 rather than 1. But he's high in the $1 range or whatever, however you want to think about it, right? He's somebody that you would rather get. You should have low expectations for probably, but I mean, we know what we're going to get from John Birdie. Oswaldo Cabrera could actually be, interesting, even if the default expectations are low. Do you want to move on to the guy who was supposed to be next on the list?
Yeah, sure. Jared Triolo, looking like he's going to be the everyday second baseman. Good defender. Should keep him in the lineup, even if he doesn't get off to a great start at the plate. Third base eligible, going to pick up second base eligibility soon because that's where he's playing. Doesn't have much power at all. Does have some stolen base potential, stole 20-plus bases in 2021 and 2022. In the minors, another 16 steals in 111 games in 2023 between the majors and minors. He doesn't really pop anywhere. He's, I think, more of an NL-only play for me, but I'll go ahead and throw $1 out for him.
Yeah, I'll go with a push there. He is my $1 final hitter on my Tout Wars NL only roster, and I'm very happy there. He's playing. That's all you really need in those leagues. And so in those leagues, if he's still out there, sure, but I'm not sure he's going to do a whole lot more than play. Trey Lipscomb, the next name on the list here. Guess we're not even sure he is going to play. He did not make the Nationals opening day roster, but when Nick Senzel got hurt just an hour before opening day or something, took a ground ball off his thumb. Really just a tough break for that guy. But good break for Trey Lipscomb, I guess. Not a big prospect, but just 23 years old and had a good spring. Had a 995 OPS. Of course, it took a 452 BABIP to get him there. Just 1 homer, 1 steal. So I'm not seeing him as somebody particularly exciting, but a hot spring on the team is at least a 1% or maybe a little bit above John Birdie, just in hopes that maybe there's something here, but I wouldn't get my hopes up. How about you?
Yeah, I might go over on 1, just as you mentioned. There's youth there and theoretically some upside. He was in the lineup tonight for the Nationals at third base, so he might have a chance to get some regular playing time there, but yeah, kind of a B-level prospect. Was really talked up by the beat writers a lot during spring training, but don't know how much upside there is there. So 2% is probably about the max I would go.
All right.
Another guy who suddenly is back on the radar, Miguel Sano, after not playing at all in 2023, had knee issues the year before, didn't play a ton in 2022 either. Came to Angels camp as a non-roster invitee, and he basically came as half of Miguel Sano. He said 58 pounds, just a crazy amount. Hopefully I would think to get those knees healthier, I would guess, and won a job. And he started at designated hitter each of the first 2 games. Is he going to be the regular designated hitter? He's first base eligible right now. He actually played a decent amount of third base in spring training. I don't know if they might use him there on some days that they put Anthony Rendon in the DH spot. I'm not really I don't know why the Angels aren't just giving these at bats to Joe Adell. I mean, theoretically, he's still has some upside. Miguel Sano isn't ancient, but if Miguel Sano does get regular playing time of a full season, he's probably going to hit 30 home runs. That's just what he does. He's also probably going to bat 190, and I am highly skeptical that he actually does ultimately get those everyday at bats. So I'm going to say 1% and not even feel great about that. What do you think on that?
So I'm actually going to say over, but it's a
Okay.
pessimistic over. I think he's the kind of guy that you should actually try to get, even though I think it isn't going to work out. Because if it does work, if losing all that weight was the answer, we know that Sano does some things incredibly well. We also know that he's very likely to play his way out of the league because that's what he does.
Yep.
But if you put just 2-3% on him, and if a low enough number where you can stomach it if he is off the roster next Sunday, because the floor is that low, right? He could strike out all the time and be gone within a week. So you'd be better keep the number pretty low. But unlike some of the guys we talked about so far, you can actually picture a world in which Sano has a season you're really happy about, and it's not likely. But you can picture him doing something where you're like, wow, remember how I got Miguel Sano on the first weekend? I don't think it's going to happen. And I'm not going to bid on him anywhere where I need it to work out. But it might actually work out. And a lot of these guys, they're just going to be there. So a pessimistic 2 or 3% from me. But if I want some power, the guy I would much rather get is JD Davis. Moving from a part-time role in San Francisco to what should be an everyday role in Oakland. Horrible park. Horrible lineup, the worst possible combination of factors there. But JD Davis can really hit. And if you need power and you want playing time, you're not going to find many guys like him. And so if he's still out there, and he's actually out there in nearly half of TGFBI leagues, I think we might need to go 6 to 8% on him if you need a corner guy.
I'm good with that. Just think about, a Brent Rooker season last year. Like he could hit 30 home runs. His JD Davis's batted ball data has always been pretty good. As you mentioned, the park, not good. The lineup, not good. But because he does usually hit the ball pretty hard, maybe that isn't going to affect his home run output too much because he could clear the fence anyway. But yeah, I think 6 to 8%. I would probably go under on that, but I could certainly see being that aggressive with him. He's, of the guys we've talked about, he's certainly among the most interesting. Brian Rocchio, I think among the most interesting of the names we're going to talk about, just because he's kind of a former top prospect. I guess technically still a prospect. He's still a rookie. But I'm not sure how interesting he is from a fantasy skill set perspective. Won the shortstop job over Gabriel Arias, but middling power. He's got decent speed. He had like a 25 stolen base season his last full year in the minors, but the sprint speed was like 50% last year with the Guardians, and his stolen base totals prior to that haven't been great, and he's been caught a lot as well. The power has been so-so. He's hitting at the bottom of a bad lineup. So as generally interesting as he potentially could be as a top 100 prospect, I'm just not sure that there's ultimately going to be a whole lot there in redraft leagues. So I could be talked into 2%, but that might be pushing it a little for me.
Yeah, I think I'd take the under on the 2. I think he's more interesting in real life. I think if you look at the prospect list, he's going to be on the top 100 in most places. But that's just because, he does everything all right while playing shortstop. And that is somebody who can carve out a long career as, just a guy, maybe like a JP Crawford type or something you might describe similarly. Well, he makes good contact, but what else does he do at an elite level? So there's leagues where you want someone like that if they're going to be in the lineup all the time, but there's almost no leagues where you are excited to have a guy like that. So he's one that I don't think I care that I miss out on unless I really need playing time at shortstop. He's got more of it than I think the next guys on the list who will really just breeze through. Jorge Mateo, I threw him on here because with Jackson Holiday out of town, Mateo's going to play a little bit more and could run a little bit, but I think he's a 0 to 1 kind of guy for me.
Probably not more than 1. I would probably throw a dollar on him.
Right.
He's kind of be super utility-ish. He's gonna play some outfield, play some second base, maybe a little bit of shortstop. And we know he can run. Can't do much else. And 1% is probably about right for him.
All right, more or less than your next guy here.
Yeah, Tyler Wade. I'm not bidding on Tyler Wade.
Yeah.
He is getting regular starts at third base for the time being for the Padres. I don't really know why the Padres are carrying Graham Pauley on the roster.
Right. They're not going to use him.
Yeah, because he's actually somewhat interesting. But Tyler Wade has been a stolen base source before. But I'm just not terribly interested, particularly because, Manny Machado theoretically could be ready to play third base like any day now, and Tyler Wade is going to be out of a job. So I don't think I would bother. He's the downstream $0 bid that you hope you don't end up with.
Yep, I think same way for me. Just wanted to throw him out there because, hey, he's getting some starts. That's the infielders. There's a couple outfielders. Mitch Haniger, he'll be gone in a 15-team league for sure. In a 12-team league, though, he's out there, a decent chance. I think that you can go at least 6 on him because when he plays, he's pretty good, and he's playing right now. I think you should expect to drop him, by mid-season when he gets hurt. But in the shallower leagues, the replacement level is higher. I don't know if he blows the replacement level out of the water, so I'm probably only going 6, 7, 8 in a shallow league. How about you?
Yeah, I think that's about right. He had an awesome spring for whatever that's worth, and also hit a home run in the first game, I believe, right? And as you mentioned, on the rare occasions he's been healthy, he can hit for power. Maybe the returning to Seattle is what he ultimately needs. But the injuries inevitably are going to happen with him. We know that. But I think
of which, your next guy also injuries.
Yes, Aaron Hicks. Somewhat surprisingly, at least to me, batting second for the Angels each of the first 2 games of the season. Not only that he's batting that high in the lineup, but also that he's playing right field against righties instead of Mickey Moniak. He's a perfectly fine deep league play, I think. He late last season, after being cut loose by the Yankees, got picked up by the Orioles, had put up an 806 OPS, 7 home runs, 6 stolen bases in 65 games. He's in his mid-30s at this point, and he's not going to do anything super exciting, but a little bit of power, a little bit of speed. If he continues to hit second, I think he's worthy of a deep league play. Maybe $3. What do you think? Over under?
That was the number in my head. I was thinking 2 to 3 more than 3 to 4, so I'll take the under if I have to, but I think you said it at a good place. The final outfielder on the list, let's throw Nick Martini on here. He started on opening day and homered twice, so we have to at least mention him. But I also was remembering that about this time last year on my MLB barometer, I wrote up as one of the risers, Jason Vosler. Do you remember Jason Vosler? He had about 1 good week with the Reds. So that could easily happen here with Nick Martini. I wouldn't throw more than 1% on him. But if he's playing against righties in a good lineup, in a good park, I don't think it's crazy to go with him. So 1% there on Nick Martini.
Yeah, I think that's fine. He could TJ Friedel his way into a handful of home runs in that park. He's always had decent plate discipline, and Great American Ballpark could squeeze just enough pop out of him that, sure, $1.
Yeah, and he would be quite a fun story if he does get more playing time than expected in his age 34 season, having gone over to Korea a couple years ago. It would be a cool story to follow. We're going to take a look at some of the pitchers we're picking up, including Ben Brown, who's got about 4 or 5 comments at this point. But first, I want to talk to you about Vivid Seats. Finally, baseball is back. Did you know that, Ryan? Vivid Seats tells us that baseball is indeed back. This MLB season, knock it out of the park with Vivid Seats and score great tickets to the biggest games of the year. Every fastball, every home run, and every eye-popping play of your favorite team, live and in person. Plus, with Vivid Seats rewards, you earn rewards with every single ticket purchase. Just buy 10 tickets, then cash in your credit toward your free 11th ticket. Talk about an easy win. And here's a pro reward tip. When buying tickets for your whole group, split the bill and make progress towards your free 11th ticket even faster. From behind the dugout to the upper deck, Vivid Seats has great tickets for all the 2024 games that matter to you. Just visit vividseats.com or download the app today. Vivid Seats, experience it live. See vividseats.com/rewards for terms and conditions. Back here on the Saturday FAAB edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, Erik Halterman and Ryan Boyer. We've gotten to the end of our list, which is the pitchers that we're considering picking up. And why don't we start with you, Ryan? You've got the first name on our list.
Yeah, Jack Flaherty, 2.95 ERA this spring, 26-4, strikeout to walk rate over 18 and a third innings. The velocity was up. He mentioned that he had been having trouble with the consistency of his mechanics his last couple of years in St. Louis, and thinks he's figured that out. Good park, good division to pitch in. He still should theoretically be in his prime. We've been kind of burned by Jack Flaherty the last couple of years, but I think there's potentially still some upside there. I know Chris Fetter, the pitching coach with the Tigers, has a good reputation. Maybe he's going to be able to get the most out of Jack Flaherty. I think he's viable, even at least as a speculative play in a shallower league, and you can move on if it's not looking like it's going to work out. 7%, I'll say 7%. You go over under.
I go under just because I can't see myself going higher, but I don't think that 7 itself is unreasonable. I think I'd probably be 5 to 7. The key always with the pitchers in shallower leagues is the replacement level is high, so he better be actually good and not just in the rotation. And some of Flaherty's appeal is that he's going to be there, and the park's pretty good. But, if there's a chance that he could get back some of what he had before, I think now's the time to go in on him in a shallower league, and maybe your 5, 6, 7% purchase ends up paying dividends. Let's move to Max Meyer, another guy who has been probably picked up last week in a mixed league, but should be out there in shallower leagues. I won't throw out his teammate Ryan Weathers because he just kind of got knocked around while we were recording. Only had a 4-inning start, 3 earned runs, 7 hits in his debut. But Max Meyer, when he debuts, is his coming Sunday, I think, or is he not until Monday? That's going to affect his price for sure. Just double checking this. He is coming Monday.
Monday, okay.
So it's going to be Trevor Rogers on Sunday. So that means that we're not going to see Max Meyer before we have to bid on him in shallower leagues. But I would still do it. I think I would go get Max Meyer. I think he was an exciting prospect before his Tommy John surgery early in the 2022 season. I think he's not going to last in the rotation that long because he's just coming back from Tommy John surgery, but he's there now. I think in a 12-team league and smaller, still maybe only, 4 to 5% because he could lose that spot pretty quickly when the Marlins get healthy, but is definitely an interesting guy. I'd love to have him on my team if I can.
Yeah, I would probably take the over on that just for the upside alone. Obviously, he's going to face long-term workload concerns, and we don't know how long he's going to keep that rotation spot, but I think he's worth paying for that upside. The other guy who's upside, worth paying for, I think, Jared Jones, who I just checked the box score, 10 strikeouts in 5 2/3 innings against the Marlins tonight. Did give up 3 runs. So not all perfect, but flash that upper 90s fastball and a slider that goes as fast as like 92 miles an hour. I mean, the stuff is certainly appealing. 0 earned runs and a 15-8 strikeout to walk rate in 16 1/3 innings this spring. He had an elevated ERA at AAA Indianapolis last year. Might scare people off a little bit, but control was solid, 28.3% strikeout rate there. He's got big stuff. What is the workload going to ultimately look like? We're not sure, but I think he might be the most interesting pitcher here. I would say 10%. Where are you at with him?
Yeah, I think because he had a good start today, I think you're going to have to go at least 10%. Yeah.
Yep.
And I think I'd be going for him in a 12-team league, which is where he's more likely to be available, but also in leagues where the first FAAB run is this weekend. He's probably going to be there, and I think I'd go into at least 10%. I think there's real strikeout upside and a great park. There is real downside, of course. He may just not be good enough. He may throw too many walks and just be out of the rotation by the end of April. But this is, I think, one of the first big prospects who could actually be very good. And those are the guys who you want to save those big buys for. Luis Gil, similarly, he has made the Yankees opening day rotation as the fifth starter, also coming back from injury. Last time he pitched, he threw 2 starts, 4 total innings at the end of last year. His big league experience started way back in 2021, and he still has prospect eligibility, which is kind of weird. He's still only 25 years old. I was talking about him with James Anderson on Farm Friday on the RotoWire Sirius XM show on Friday, shockingly. And James was saying that he thought of Luis Gil and Garrett Crochet pretty similarly as they were coming up as prospects, and liked Gil more. They're both guys who, had 2 really good pitches, and we're not sure how much else they have. But so in that light, I should maybe be liking Gil more than I was. And maybe he's not just a guy who's going to start once or twice. We're not going to see him till Monday, though. So it's that situation again. Yep. I don't know how much we go here. Initially, I was thinking only 2, 3, 4. But after hearing that from James, I feel like I should be going at least 6, 7, 8%. No?
Yeah, I was probably more in your range, the 3 or 4-ish range for him. But that's interesting to hear James' thoughts on him. I mean, he should get a chance to prove that he belongs in the rotation for a little stretch here. Certainly showed this spring that he has plenty of upside. I'm fine with, that a fairly modest bid, but as you mentioned, he could be starting Monday, you said. So
yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see what I assume it starts with a 2-start week for him. And
at Arizona and home against the Jays.
Yeah.
Not the easiest though, but it is 2 started.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm good with I'd probably go around 4% for him. Okay. Bowden Francis, another guy who's in the Blue Jays rotation, at least for now. Really good as a reliever last year with the Blue Jays, won a spot in the rotation with a strong spring. Minor league track record's been kind of hit or miss, but generally has missed a decent amount of bats and had good control. The stuff is pretty ordinary for him. I do think that, obviously the Blue Jays are hoping to eventually get Alek Manoah back at some point. Ricky Tiedemann certainly has way more upside than Bowden Francis. I'm probably not going to go more than 1 for him. What do you think?
Yeah, I think if he was somebody who looked like he was going to have a long-term rotation spot, maybe 2 or 3 only. I don't know if I'm seeing him as super exciting. I mean, he's in his age 28 season and has never made a major league start. So it's not as if this is some big up-and-comer. And given that he may only be in the rotation for a little bit, I wouldn't go too high on him. I wouldn't go too high either on Emerson Hancock, who will be starting in Seattle, at least as long as Brian Wu is down. Hancock was the 6th overall pick back in the 2020 draft, so has prospect pedigree at least back then, but a decent amount of it has worn off. And so we're kind of left with the guy whose most interesting asset is the fact that he pitches in Seattle, which I do care about. Anybody who pitches in Seattle every 5 days, Marco Gonzalez was on plenty of fantasy teams when he was out there. So I like him for that amount, but I don't like Hancock in a shallower league. And even in a deeper league, I think this is just a 1%er to me. I don't think that I'm missing out on some big buzzy prospect here, given that his prospect pedigree's fallen off a bit.
Yeah, I'm with you. The upside just doesn't jibe with the the 6th overall pick. He's not a high strikeout guy. He could be perfectly fine as a fill-in in the Mariners rotation, but I would not spend much of my FAAB on him. I would spend a little more for Ben Brown. He's looking like he's going to take Justin Steele's spot in the rotation, and his first start could be lined up for the Rockies at home. Pretty soft landing spot there. Strikeout rate, or the walk rate rather, in AAA last year was high, but keep in mind that was the ABS system they were using. A lot of pitchers had a high walk rate using that, so I don't think we need to be super worried about that. Strikeout rate last year, 31.1%. Give up just 1 run, 12-5 strikeout to walk rate in 14 innings this spring. I don't know if he's going to be a long-term solution in the Cubs rotation. They also have Cade Horton, who they are probably going to be looking to break in at some point this year. But I do think there's some pretty notable upside with Ben Brown. I would be willing to go 6%, taking the over-under on him there.
I think I'd go over. I was thinking maybe 7-8 in my head because he's got the upside to potentially make 30 starts in this rotation.
Yep.
I wouldn't go over 10% unless I was, pretty sure that he has a pretty good path to that. But if you look at, it's not as if Javier Assad is somebody who's guaranteed to stick around. Even Jordan Wicks, he's a young pitcher like Brown who has some potential, but is far from proven. And I feel like 7-8% is a good range for someone who is interesting, not necessarily anything close to proven yet, but interesting and has a chance to be really quite good. With a strikeout rate that high, I would love to have him in my roster for a couple starts because there's a chance that he makes, 20 plus. There's a chance if those first couple starts go well, I think that you may get a full season worth of a starter, which is why I'm willing to go over, even with that 16% walk rate. As you mentioned, there's some reasons why we shouldn't be too worried. I'm worried. I wish that was, a 10% last year, but we'll see. I'm willing to go for a price that makes me reasonably likely to get him as long as it's low enough that I'm not hurt too much if we lose. Some budget pitchers, budget relievers, just to end here. I think we can go pretty quickly because we've talked about the more interesting option in all of these bullpens. But Brock Stewart, throw at least 1 or 2%, right? We're not guaranteed that he's well behind Griffin Jax. It's just that Griffin Jax got the save.
Yeah, Stewart has better swing and miss stuff. His numbers last year were actually just insanely good. He's a couple of years out of baseball, I think, from an injury perspective, but then came back and was throwing really hard, flashing great strikeout stuff, but also got hurt again last year. But, it was a short-term play. $1, I think, is fine. Griffin Jax probably at the hierarchy there, top of the hierarchy there, but I'm fine with $1. Kind of rapid fire with these other relievers here. Yimi Garcia and Chad Green with the Blue Jays. I don't think John Schneider is traditionally, when Jordan Romano has not been available, he's shied away from having a set closer. I don't think that's going to be any different now. Could even throw Tim Maiza in the mix here if there's lefties due up in the 9th. I saw one beat writer speculate that Green might have a little leg up over Yimi Garcia. I had kind of been leaning Yimi Garcia out of the two. I probably wouldn't go more than $2 on either one of them, though. Are you going to go over or under on that?
Yeah, I think under. I think I would throw 1% on both and just take whichever one I get. And then even if I do, I wouldn't be 100% sure they're even in my lineup. So I think that's the problem there. I will end the show here with Trevor McGill and Yoel Payamps. When I threw them on the outline, they had only missed 1 save chance to Abner Uribe. But by the time we finished our show, they've now missed 2, which means I think they are very much the bottom of the reliever queue. I think we're basically just picking up Uribe as if he's the closer. And McGill and Payamps are just setup men the same way they were before with Devin Williams. That could change in a week, if Uribe blows 2 saves. So I think they're still on the end of my waterfall, but I don't even see the need to go more than the minimum for either of them.
Yep, I'm with you. A $0 or $1 bid, I think, is plenty for both of those guys.
All right, so we've discussed something like 40 players or so. I hope we discussed every single player that you listeners were considering picking up. I'm sure we managed to do that. Maybe next time we will just list every player on every roster, and then we'll be sure that we get everyone. We'll just go rapid fire. I'll say a name, you'll say a number, and we'll just keep going. But we thank you, listeners, for sticking it out on this very long show. We'll see if we can get these a little bit faster in the future. But hey, a lot of names to pick up this first week. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ryan. And I'll be back tomorrow on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball podcast presented by Fantrax with Sarah Sanchez talking about some opening weekend overreactions. Hope to see you all there then.